Hi, I'm Joanne Magley, and on this edition of Volusia Magazine, we are talking about the special election in May when residents will be asked to vote on an additional half-cent sales tax to fund road and water quality projects in Volusia County. Stay tuned for the facts on the half-cent tax. Hi, I'm Joanne Magley. I'm the Community Information Director for Volusia County Government, and I'm joined today in studio with two very special guests. We have our County Manager, George Rechtenwald, and Tad Casbear. He is the County Engineer for Volusia County Government. And George, we're going to start with you. You are new to your role as County Manager, but you are no stranger to county government. You've been here for more than 20 years, and a lot of your service has been with Public Works. So first off, give us a little bit of insight into the world of Public Works and road programs, because a lot has changed over the years.
Yes, certainly it has. 20 years ago, we had the ability to fund our road program mainly with gas taxes and impact fees, a little bit of what we call prop share from developers. At that time, the costs of roads were about half of what they are today. And at that time, we were able to fund multiple projects per year. Now we're in a situation where it takes multiple years to save up for a project. And I will say in Florida, we're always trying to keep up with growth, and it gets a little cyclical at times. But we're certainly in a time right now when there is quite a bit of growth. And when there's growth, there's also again, quite a bit of inflation for construction costs, so that affects our ability to build these roads. And
give us a little bit of insight into the length of time it takes to plan for road lengthening, road expansion in areas.
Well, a major expansion of taking a 2-lane from a 4-lane can take 5 to 8 years of planning, design, permitting, and then of course the construction itself. You have a lot of utilities under the ground that usually are not part of the county. They're usually with the cities. They have to be moved as well. You have electrical poles, all the stuff along the sides. And then you also have to expand or add a lot of retention ponds. You have to buy a lot of property typically as part of that process.
So Tad, you oversee all the construction projects here for county government, and George mentioned how the prices of construction have increased significantly over the years. Give us some insight into what it costs today to build certain sections of road.
Sure. As you can imagine, there are quite a few factors that go into it. Generally, the cost ranges between $4.5 million up to $5 million, $5.5 million. So, bigger factors in that are obviously if you have to acquire a right-of-way for the road, as George mentioned, that can be rather expensive, particularly in urban areas where you're potentially displacing businesses or even homes. So you get into the rural areas, you're getting into vacant parcels or farm, it's not quite so expensive. So a large part of that is where you're building the road. So.
And that figure that you mentioned, $5 million roughly, that's just for a mile section of road, correct?
Correct, yes.
So you can, I guess, do the math and see that a large section, that money adds up really quickly.
Yes, it does. Far quicker than it used to in the past.
So, George, talk about how you mentioned it briefly, but right now we use the gas tax, which is funded for certain projects. So talk about where that money is going now and why it's not a sufficient funding mechanism.
Sure. Gas taxes fund not only the construction of roads, but they're also the source to maintain all the infrastructure, all the road infrastructure that we have today. So through the years, those costs have gone up as well. Gas taxes themselves, however, are pennies on a gallon, And as we have more fuel-efficient cars, really the amount of gas sold has remained relatively flat to the last few years. So therefore, that revenue has remained pretty flat while our costs have increased across the board, both in maintenance and construction. A portion of that tax is dedicated to capital projects. So that money is still there. And then we take that money and we use impact fees that come from basically the people who build a home or people who build a commercial shopping center or any kind of building that's added. But impact fees can only go to new construction of roads based on the effect that those homes or those businesses had on that road in that area.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about why impact fees can't be used in certain areas, and you just went over that. So all the city and the county government, all the cities, they all agreed that this is a very important issue, funding for road and water quality projects, and therefore decided that it needed to be put on the ballot for voters to decide if they're willing to pay half a cent extra on sales tax to help fund these projects. So this will be a mail ballot. It'll be sent out May 1st, starting May 1st to all the registered voters in the county, and then it's due back to the elections office May 21st. So exactly what are we asking people to vote on?
We're asking people to vote on the county ordinance to add this half-cent surtax to the existing 6.5 cents that is there today. That money will go exclusively for infrastructure projects. The county council narrowed down the grouping to include roads, bridges, sidewalks, stormwater or flood control projects, and water quality projects.
And so one question that comes up from the public that you've heard at many public meetings that you've both attended is, how can we be sure that the money from a half-cent sales tax will be used for those projects that you just stated?
Well, there are several layers of protection. These funds will be a restricted fund. They can only be used for the intended purpose, and the purpose is outlined first in a state statute that allows counties and communities to add the surtax onto their 6% sales tax. So you have that state law, and then you have the county ordinance that I mentioned that further restricts it. You also have the fact that the various governments, the city and the counties, every year have to vote on a capital project list and program. So the public will have direct input with their elected officials. And then you have a Citizens Oversight Committee that is part of the ordinance that will consist of a citizen from each city and the county, cannot be an elected official, who will match those projects against the laws at hand to make sure that they fit that criteria.
And every year, like you mentioned, these projects will be up for review. We might start off with an initial list, but priorities may change throughout the coming years, and the council and the city commissioners will review these lists each year.
Correct. They'll take a look, and you have literally hundreds of millions of dollars of identified needs in the community, and each of those communities are right now in the process. They all form those needs lists and are looking at how they would program them, again based on the need of the time.
So we have these lists. From the county has lists and cities have lists. So Tad, talk about some of the major priority projects that are on the list and how they became priorities.
Sure. The current list that's out there right now is not the final list. It's a list that was prepared by the staff as a starting point for conversations with the public and with the council. We looked at each of the 4 different quadrants of the county and rated the top 5 projects based on the consideration of the existing traffic loads, The traffic loads that will be projected out over the coming years based on future developments that are coming in, and as well as other factors such as schedule, timing. How quickly could we get a project to completion, funding. So each of the quadrants has a traffic need that certainly is important, and as we move through the process now that the council's given us direction on how to set this up, we'll go ahead and prepare a projected program based on the council's input, the public's input, and develop a schedule.
And I think it's important to note that all of the projects that are on these lists can be seen on the county's website, volusia.org/sales tax. And you also have an interactive map on that webpage where folks can type in their address of where they live or maybe where they work, and then projects, road and water quality projects, will populate that area.
Correct. That's both the city and the county projects.
Yes. So, all right. So, George, if passed, the sales tax will generate about $45 million, and about 35% of that funding will come from tourists. So people who use our roads and affect the water supply will also be sharing in the funding of these much needed projects. So that's important because, again, it's a fair way to distribute the tax.
And our neighbor counties also have the same thing. So when you go and you shop and you visit and you drive into those counties, you're paying for their infrastructure.
Is there any other way to fairly have something in place like that where everybody has a share other than this type of half-cent sales tax?
Not at this time. I mean, this is the vehicle that the state of Florida allows us to use. And like I say, they actually allow more than a half cent, but this is what the county council and the cities all agreed upon, which is pretty historic that the county and the cities agreed on this and the wording to the ordinance. So it was very shows the importance to the community.
And so talk about how that funding, if it's approved, how it's distributed throughout the county.
Sure. It would be distributed on a formula that's based by population. It is the same formula that is used today for the distribution of the existing sales tax that goes out. So it works out to very close to 50% to the county and then 50% split amongst the cities.
And you have a lot of leveraging abilities if you have this dedicated funding source. So there's an extra opportunity for partnerships with FDOT, with the cities, and with other organizations.
Absolutely. And that landscape has changed through the years. When I first started, you could often count on a much higher percentage of money from the Department of Transportation for the federal government. And through the years, those monies have dried up and they expect more of a match. So it's very important that we have money available that we can put on a project, and then more money will come. And we've been very successful. Right now, probably more in the water quality projects than the road projects. But that's very important. If you have the project and you have some funding, it's much easier to leverage that to get grants, bring in monies from out of the area.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to switch gears and talk more about the water quality project. So, George, you're going to stay with us, but Tad Casbear, County Engineer, thank you for being with us today, and we'll talk to you later. We'll be right back.
They said I couldn't dream. Called me a piece of trash and swore that's all I'd ever be. Said a bottle couldn't see the ocean. Give up. Go back to the dumpster. But I didn't listen. I made my way. And now, I am what I've always wanted to be.
over 399,000 ballots to be mailed out on May 1st for the May 21st special sales tax election. Once a voter receives that, inside their envelope, they will have a ballot, a secrecy sleeve, and a return envelope that a voter must sign in order for their ballot to count. We mail them on May 1st. They have to be back to our office by 7 p.m. on election night. If a voter does not want to mail in their ballot, they can also drop it off at any city hall or town hall where they live. There'll be collection boxes there, sealed, secured, and my office will come around and pick them up every day and bring them back to the office for tabulating.
Stay connected with the latest Volusia County news, events, and updates on our social media channels. Like and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Catch up with previous stories on YouTube, or just head over to our website, volusia.org.
Joining us now is Mike Ulrich. He is the director of the county's Water Resources and Utilities Division. Welcome. So your division is responsible for producing and delivering safe drinking water, as well as treat and dispose wastewater within environmentally safe regulatory standards. So talk about those standards and talk about issues regarding water quality here in Volusia County.
I think that one of the key elements of what we're talking about most recently has been the state or the quality of the water across the state. Certainly within the last 8 to 9 months, the effects of red tide affecting both east and west coast of Florida, from Sarasota and Sanibel to as far up as Brevard County. We've seen the negative impacts in terms of health and the ecology, and as well as the economic impacts of what those costs have been. I think that one of the biggest challenges in terms of dealing with that in the future is not just the projects themselves, but really a true understanding among all of us as to the value of water. We commonly, everybody knows the cost of water. They get a water bill every month. They see it 12 times a year and everything, but it's not until the water's not available or there's something wrong with that water that people finally realize what the true value of that water is. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, not only within our own community, but throughout the entire state.
But you also have regulatory issues that you have to address, and that falls on your division, and the half cent provides revenue that you can properly do that with.
Yeah.
So without that proposed half cent revenue, what's the challenge if there's not that extra funding mechanism?
Well, I guess the big challenge is whether or not the sales tax passes is the state realizes there's a problem, and the regulations, the laws that have been passed in 2016, the state had passed the Florida Aquifer and Springs Protection Act, and that put in certain regulations and requirements for us to address the pollutants in 3 springs within our own county. There's 30 outstanding Florida springs that were named by the legislature back in 2016. 3 of them are in Volusia County. That would be Gemini, Blue, and DeLeon Springs. Of course, on the east side of the county, the Mosquito Lagoon, which is a portion of the entire Indian River Lagoon, is also declared impaired, and as a result of that, there's additional regulatory requirements to again restore the health of that spring. So regardless of whether or not the sales tax occurs, these things are going to have to happen. The benefit of the sales tax, as George had mentioned earlier, and as you did, is this additional money that comes from outside sources. When, if faced to have to deal with these problems ourselves and just local, that will be borne by everybody that lives within this community. I liken the sales tax to a certain extent, because of the amount that could come in, is almost like a grant from outside. We receive federal and state grants to attack some of these problems, but this additional money, I guess at 40 or 35% is like an extra $16 million a year in grant revenue because it's coming from outside of our county, which takes much less of the burden off of our citizens throughout the county.
So George, talk a little bit about the connection between when you do a road project, it's automatically connected to improving water quality, even though it's a road project.
That's correct. Through the years, we have recognized the importance of when you put in infrastructure to have a little bit more holistic approach. Requirements for water runoff from roads have really increased. They have to be treated. So we have many devices in place. One of the, of course, principal items are retention ponds that take that water and allow sediments to settle and treat. We also have baffle boxes and other type devices that take litter, the stuff that's found along, and capture that to avoid it getting into our waterways. So every major road project, definitely contains a water quality element to it.
And when you talked earlier about how we have some funding from the gas tax and some funding from impact fees for certain areas, both of those mechanisms can't be used for water quality projects, specific water quality projects.
That's correct. Impact fees have to be used for thoroughfare roads because they're thoroughfare impact fees. There are other impact fees that are out there. You have school impact fees and parks and fire and other things. But at the end of the day, what most of the conversation has been around transportation impact fees. For water, there is no system like that in place. A lot of the burden can fall on your local utilities, but remember, they're not all the problem. In fact, they're actually seen as a solution in a lot of cases. But there are a lot of pollutants that get in the water from fertilizer, and we have in this county large drainage canals, and those canals through the years have been used by development to drain or pop off in a lot of cases into those areas. And when that happens, that takes the fertilizer from their yards into the water bodies and increases the nutrients there, which often contribute to the blooms. It's also been a little bit more in the news lately about some of the aging sewer systems that are around throughout the county and the municipalities. Those systems cannot take big storm surges and big rain sometimes that we get here in Florida, of course. So when that happens, their systems are overrun, and then often the outfall when that occurs would be into the same ditches, canals, into the Halifax River. So again, those systems also need to be upgraded to building capacity, fix aging pipes. A lot of those pipes, especially on the east side of the county, have been in the ground 50, 60 years. And that's a nationwide problem. It's nothing new to Florida, but because of that, you do have leakage and loss into the soils and then eventually into the water bodies and water table.
So Mike, in the spring of 2018, you led the completion of a major renovation project for the Southwest Regional Water Reclamation Facility in DeBary. So talk about what was done and what the results were of that project.
Sure. The genesis of that really started as far back as 2015 when the County Council really adopted our first water quality plan. We essentially in that first planning document, it was more to just assess from like that 10,000-foot view of where the problems were occurring. This was even in advance of some of the stuff that the state eventually came down upon, but you could sort of see the writing on the wall. So some of this had actually begun then. At that point in time, within the Blue Spring Spring Shed, we had 3 wastewater treatment plants that were all operating within the requirements of their DEP permit, But when the new rule came in for the springs protection, it really required that we have to change to an advanced wastewater treatment process. The decisions that were made during that process were more than just the plant itself. Realizing, what our options were, we could have gone with 3 plants that would all treat at AWT levels, advanced wastewater treatment levels. But what we chose to do rather than that was begin a process of actually rerouting all of the flow that was coming through 3 different cities, Deltona, Orange City, and DeBary, and ultimately get to a point where we would be moving all of that water into one of our major regional facilities and closing the other 2. So we have some certain operational efficiencies as well as cost effectiveness. Last year when we opened up the facility, or reopened it up, we had expanded it to be able to take the flows from all those other plants as well as prepare for additional growth, which is going to continue to come, whether we like it or not. People like it here, so they're going to keep on coming. And as a result of that, preparing for the future as well as taking care of the current pollution that was occurring.
And this project received a couple of major awards. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Well,
again, it all goes back to the planning strategies that began even before that, and how we chose to do this. But last year, the Florida Rural Water Association had recognized Volusia County as the wastewater system of the year for medium-sized systems, and then we even had a national publication. Not one you'd find on a coffee table, typically, Water and Waste Digest, though, but that recognized our project, the only one in the state of Florida, as a 2018 top project. And again, something we can be very proud of within this county, and some of the leadership that led us to what we've been doing at this point.
And George, you've mentioned this before, but with all of your years overseeing public works and these types of projects, you have a high level of confidence in the staff that oversees these major projects and the future projects that will be going forward under the proposed half-cent sales tax.
Exactly. We're blessed in this county to have very experienced staff like Mike and Tad and a lot of the engineers that work for both of them. We have a long track record of producing our projects on time and in budget. We just recently went through a state audit. We couldn't even put this initiative on the ballot unless the state had audited it. They brought in a firm from Texas, actually, and they looked at our work, and it was centered around our ability to manage these type projects. And there were 6 major categories that they looked at, and we went through all of them with flying colors.
That's great. So there's a lot of information available on the county's website, volusia.org/sales tax, and residents can also send comments and questions via email to salestaxinfo@volusia.org. So Mike Ulrich, Director of the county's Water Resources and Utilities Division, and George Rechtenwald, County Manager for Volusia County, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you,
Joanne.
And that's it for this edition of Volusia Magazine. I'm Joanne Magley. We hope to see you here next week at the same time. Have a great night.